Welcome, everybody. This is episode 7 of DUCKit, where we host Jad, good friend, mentor, and the guy who co-founded Washmen. Welcome.
Thank you.
I know you. I kind of know you personally. We kind of had an acquaintance kind of relationship back in Montreal, and we both made it here, and we both had our own journeys. And I kind of know a little bit about what you do professionally as well. But please give us a quick introduction to Jad and how you ended up, getting involved with Washmen and starting that.
Okay, perfect. First of all, thank you guys for having me. My name is Jad Halaoui. I'm Lebanese originally, grew up in Saudi Arabia and in Canada, made my way to the UAE around 5 years ago, and I came here solely for the purpose of founding Washmen. So I grew up in Saudi Arabia. I never really had a relationship with Dubai whatsoever. After 4.5 years, 5 years in oil and gas, I had been looking for an exit. I was considering doing an MBA. I was considering actually getting into watchmaking. I was looking at the Patek Philippe website and seeing what it would look like to get in there. It actually took 12 years to actually become anything relevant in watchmaking, and you'd have to start at the bottom. So that option was quickly discounted. And then another option was to kind of start my own thing, but I didn't know what that would look like, and I had no experience in startups whatsoever. My friend gives me a call, tells me about this startup that he wants to build, asks me to invest first. The idea looks good. We disagree obviously on a few details, as people always do, and from here to there, the conversation becomes, why don't you join me? At that point, I had I think 4 or 5 days to make a decision. Within 2 days, the decision was made. 2 weeks later, I had already quit my job, left Canada, and ended up in Dubai, and actually left my car behind. It got towed away, completely gone, 4.5 years in the company headquarters. I mean, it got towed away after 2 years, but so that's kind of the story of how I ended up here. I've always been all in, and at the moment I'm all into Washmen. And that's kind of the founding story.
Was that Rami, the co-founder?
Yeah, Rami's my co-founder, and he's one of my friends from high school, like one of my best friends.
Nice.
Yeah.
And why laundry, man?
Well, we all need laundry.
It's not
I mean, I never did laundry, right? So
If I had this at uni, if I had laundry at uni, oh my word. Can you imagine?
I think so too. Well, for me too, I never really realized that it was a problem until I actually started Washmen. Because you never knew that it was a problem. But so laundry for me is nothing that I really dreamed about. I mean, I was an operations manager in oil and gas. I was called engineer in charge. Ultimately, what it meant was that I managed a team of engineers and their operators. And my job was ultimately to put operations together structurally, design processes and so on. And, throughout the conversation with Rami, it seemed like this is what this job demanded. And while doing oil and gas, it was always difficult to imagine what a field engineer's job would look like. What are the transferable skills? And when I heard about Washmen and the operations here, I mean, it made sense. I'm like, yes, I can easily manage this. This is easily transferable. And I think after a few years, when you first start a business, you're not really thinking about what is, in contrast to now, now when you're having already started the first business and you know that one day you'll start another one, you learn about what are the considerations you have to make. And in my case, I didn't really care that it was laundry. I didn't care what the underlying expertise was. Yeah. And I just said, I want to build my own business. And that was the vanity that I wanted to indulge. And I thought I had the skill set in order to do it. So I left my job to start a business, and it just happened that laundry was the underlying, service we were delivering. Could have been food delivery, could have been anything else.
And today you operate where? So you obviously operate here in Dubai, but territory-wise operations, what do you guys cover?
So we cover Dubai and Abu Dhabi only so far. We have a tech team in Lebanon, but that's as far as it goes at the moment.
Okay, cool. And I mean, you guys are kind of a success story. I mean, it's a story that a lot of people kind of idolize a little bit, I think, especially in the region over here. You guys have been growing kind of super consistently. It's been a success story. How's kind of the circumstances of COVID kind of impacting your business nowadays?
So the main benefit of Wash consumers was how convenient it was, especially in a busy lifestyle. And I think the second that the busy lifestyle stopped, by busy, I mean, going to work, going out at night after work, going to the gym all the time, those 3 behaviors came to a grind. That's when we saw the biggest impact on the business. So first, when people were working from home, we saw a small drop. So when it was optional, Then when it became mandatory, we saw the volume of workwear, shirts, blouses, suits, pants, and so on. That volume dropped also significantly. And then when people, you couldn't go to the gym anymore either. And that was another drop. But what was surprisingly interesting was that the volume of wash and fold, which is the laundry by the pound, laundry by the bag concept that we have, that didn't drop as much as the dry cleaning, shirts, suits, and so on. It actually stayed quite high. So it kind of tells you that we've managed to kind of weave ourselves into the fabric of many people's lives, which was always the objective, right? We were always, the motto we used to have internally is we want to replace your washing machine at home. The competition is not the guy, the other driver. The competition is not the shop around the corner. The competition is the washing machine at home. It's the behavior that people have. That ties nicely into, when you ask me why laundry, I never knew I had a problem until now I have Washmen. I think my wife can attest to the same. She never thought laundry was a challenge. And now that she has Washmen, she's kind of addicted to it,
Yeah.
It's not to talk too much about the business, but the behavior changes. And on that front, one side of the business has proved very, very resilient.
So generally, I guess people are just staying in their PJs and aren't getting dressed or getting too kind of formally kind of put together because they're staying home. But the need is still kind of consistent, right? So frequency is generally more or less the same. Is that what you're saying? But the type of services have kind of shifted a little bit.
Yeah, so I can't really talk too much about frequency because we don't have enough data yet.
Yeah.
So generally, people order with us 2 to 2.5 times a month. Right now, it's only been 6 weeks, and the behavior is very erratic. I think there's a lot of patterns that have completely changed. We're still looking into it. I mean, we need to understand this data to navigate whatever the future looks like. So I don't know the details yet.
Sure. Thanks for that. So there's been kind of, we've had a bunch of these talks, we've had a bunch of podcasts, and Steve and I also kind of run an advisory on marketing and branding and stuff like that. And we're starting to see how people are thinking about growth, right? And how people are kind of marketing their businesses now, what they're kind of thinking in terms of how do they kind of, navigate through COVID. And on the back of this, eventually at some point, there will be some sort of a new normal, whatever that is. But, how do you go back to growing? You guys, you guys have done some awesome stuff. I think, we've followed your brand for quite some time, and you even rebranded, refreshed your brand not too long ago. Great job. But how do you guys kind of think about growth? I think my career and I think Steve's career, I think, we've grown along different narratives, and we've seen how startups, change their view of growth. I mean, there was growth hacking at one point that was like, this big fad of like, you're going to have a growth hacking team, and, they're going to sit there, and these like Inspector Gadgets are going to come in and look at your data, and then they look at your content, and then they're going to find this magic recipe and try it. And that was a piece of it. And at some point it was, performance marketing and optimization and funnel and all that stuff. But what's your kind of, today I think all that stuff is kind of, been there, done that. And that's kind of like a reason to, like if you're going to play, that's kind of like, you have to do that stuff anyway. That's no longer like, you're no longer a guru if you're doing that stuff. Today, that's like everybody's supposed to be doing that. But how do you see kind of growth coming out of this, right? How do you see kind of, where's the new opportunity for business in your stage, at your size, coming out of COVID? What's kind of your view of the world there?
So I suppose you said all the right things to get me started and to get me super excited, right? So, with this entire topic of like growth hacking, performance marketing and all that, it's all, like you said, they're critical skill sets. But I think everyone is always searching for that one thing, that external factor that they need to manipulate in order to convince the world to use their service. That doesn't exist. And even at Washmen, we know that it doesn't exist. So before I get into the philosophy of how we've grown so far, it's kind of like, I want to get into the process of it. And it's a process of discovery, of like painful discovery of trying things that you really believe will work, but they don't work whatsoever. And then all of a sudden, after trying 5 or 6 things and letting them run, not retiring those initiatives, all of a sudden something clicks and your customers start loving your service. It's an iterative process. Growth hacking in general, or at least the way it's portrayed in the media, is this magic bullet solution to all your problems. And that doesn't exist. It doesn't exist, never existed. I went to a growth hacking course in 2017. I studied ultimately just kind of like process automation with no code. The thing that came out of it was a customer service center that was incredibly well put together, but it wasn't marketing related. So, you know, we tried the growth hacking route. Again, some businesses can do it. And if you're reaching millions and millions of people, then growth hacking and maybe changing your button from like orange to red can have an impact. But most businesses in this region where the scale is not global and massive, right? I mean, a business like ours, the number of laundry searches per month is very small. What's going to make a difference is going to be how do your customers perceive you? What are the challenges you're facing in order to deliver your service in a way that is appreciated by every single one of your customers? So on our side, we tried the whole, you know, performance marketing, growth hacking, and all that. It never really worked to the degree that we were told it should or it would, and we tried long and hard. What ended up working was when we created some form of identity, brand identity in public, when we refined it, and obviously that wasn't sufficient by itself. We had to significantly optimize our operations in order to understand the pain points that customers experienced before Washmen existed, and then the ones that Washmen actually introduced through, you know, through the way we were operating. And then the best way that we found out to actually grow our business has been through improving our operations and maximizing our transparency. That's really made a huge difference. That's kind of what it comes down to. So how do we grow going from here? We've taken quite a few bets over the last few months, and they all revolve around the topic of transparency. And what I mean by transparency is, you know, you get your clothes from us, you give us your clothes, you get photos of every single item you gave us for dry cleaning. The objective that we're trying to put on, and of course I'm the operations guy, so I'll be very specific to operations at least. We're trying to give you all the information that our customer service agents will be using in order for you to have the same data that they have in order to that they're using to make a decision or to inform you. So we're trying to level the playing field. What I mean by that is a lot of distrust between brands happens because there's this perception that the person on the other side is withholding information to their benefit and to my detriment. And in our case, and at least, you know, and we'll talk about this later, I suppose we'll touch on it later, but companies are built on, you know, on the kind of in the image of their founders. And I hate being wrong, and I hate being unfair. So there's those two components. And in order for me to be able to deliver a message to a customer, or not, you know, when I say I mean through the operations department, through the customer service department, through Washmen as a service, the best way to do that is to say, hey, here's all the information I have. Here's what it looks like. Here's what my customer service team is using. Here are the videos that they're watching in order to assess the situation that you are having a challenge with. Should you have a challenge? And if not, it doesn't matter. We're still sharing that information with you anyway. And then, so when you kind of iterate on that, when things are going right and when they're going wrong, people tend to trust your brand a lot more. And that's one route we're really taking, to kind of just say everything that we do that we can share, we will share. And that builds trust that ultimately allows you to introduce different initiatives, different services down the line, because people trust your brand and they trust you as a company because you're doing everything you can to do that, right? So that's one avenue. That's one avenue.
Yeah, so I think, man, I'm going to try to summarize what you're saying. It just sounds, and I'm going to dumb it down.
Yeah, go ahead.
Just for me to digest it. So it just sounds like you're saying, you know, invest time and resource on customer experience to eventually be able to build a brand, right?
That's what it comes down to, yeah.
Right. So
that's the summary of it.
So basically, have a kick-ass product market fit that over delivers, you know, on the promise that you've set, and ultimately delivers a customer experience that's, you know, unparalleled and amazing. And one of those pieces, by the way, is transparency. That's part of the kind of ethos of the experience. But ultimately, what you're saying is build a brand, build an experience that people are like, man, this is Washmen. This is why I use Washmen. This like let your brand stand for something and stand for an experience that people kind of love and adore and build some sort of connection with. And then the growth will come. Yeah.
Exactly.
And then the growth
the ultimate
will come.
point is trust.
Yeah.
I mean, I wanted to tie that into what you said about COVID, right? Like there's the path, whatever the new normal is, we don't know what that is.
Yeah.
But what we know who we are. We know what we stand for. We know what we want to do. And the only thing you can do in circumstances where the externalities are not predictable. It's the double what you can do very well and who you are. The company as a brand, as a team, and that's what we've chosen, right? And in this case, the customer experience is something we've been optimizing for. Actually, in late October, we made a conscious choice to say, guys, we have lost our way to some extent. We have become too internally focused on making our processes so much better, but we've lost focus on making the customer experience to the customer much better. It's not like we want to tell ourselves we're doing the customer experience much better. Customers should know, and then what does that look like? And that's how we've oriented, our product roadmap also. And that's how we will keep on doing it going forward.
And that's a powerful thing as well. The customer experience piece. It's funny that you're talking about it in October. Myself, as a customer of Washmen, it took a lot of time to get that traction, right? But actually, it was through word of mouth that Washmen then came back full circle to me as that experience started to change. And Chris, this is something that we speak about a lot in terms of that. The refinement on customer experience. I mean, the whole notion around growth hacking is speed. Like, we've got to grow, got to go, got to grow. But if your customer experience isn't there, then the money of growth hacking is just falling through the floor. It's just going into
down the drain. Down the drain. Retention is so critical to our business, right? Because we're building a habit. We're building hopefully what is a life-changing, paradigm-shifting habit. Is just laundry, but just, instead of you doing it inside of your home, now you have Washmen to do it. That's the only way to do that, is to be very deliberate, very intentional in the choices you make. Sometimes there's pressures around growth, right? So you're trying to deliver growth to your investors. You're trying to deliver growth to your team, to yourself. And then that comes at a certain expense. But then the lesson we've always come back to learn, which is in operationally heavy businesses that are very complex, and laundry is a very complex business. Slow is smooth and smooth is fast. That's like the one thing that I've learned, whether it's through my oil and gas experience or here. In complex businesses, you want to go smoothly. And then if you're moving smoothly, speed will come with time. And that's what you guys saw as our customers. October, November, December, and now January, February, March, we're posting our best numbers ever in terms of customer experience, order ratings, issues raised, right? We are fixing problems before they even arise. So we will be able to tell you about a challenge you may face with us before you even know it. And that's the kind of culture we're trying to build into the operation. Obviously now that's one path of excellence, but no one will know about it if you don't know how to distribute the message accurately. And so now what we're trying to understand is, what is the most effective way to just spread the message, and how do you build that message in a coherent way that people can care about, that is relevant to people. And that's historically been, I think, our weakness. We've always been, when we started off very small, we were this cool, a bit edgy brand. In the image of its founders too, right? My co-founder Rami is very edgy. He's got his own style, and then kind of Washmen was built around that image of a brand that's very solid, but very edgy, very cool. But it wasn't really personable, right? And we don't know how to communicate. And now the rebrand that you mentioned was to soften the brand a bit. We had to soften it. It was too masculine, too manly, too raw. And then we wanted to soften it up to be more, it's funny it's weird to say it's more inclusive, a more inclusive brand, but that's ultimately what it was for. It's to be more accessible to everybody.
Absolutely. And, I think it's a good segue for the next thing I kind of wanted to touch on. Customer experience is only really achievable. So whatever that vision of that experience is, or that brand is that you want to deliver, customer experience is only achievable when you have a cohesive cross-organization kind of commitment of everyone in your company. So the brand has to kind of exist internally before you can do anything externally. So, I love this topic, and I've talked about it with you before, and Steve and I have talked about it before, but that takes a vision that is easily articulated, and it takes a leadership style to kind of introduce I would say a healthy organizational culture. And when it comes to leadership, man, how do you, because that's how brands are built, right? With clear vision of the brand, clear leadership. How do you, and I guess Rami to some extent, of course, as a CEO, how do you guys kind of manage that culture, and how do you guys deal with that leadership kind of responsibility?
Yeah, it's a tough question, right? It's a tough question
Yeah.
because it forces you to review 5 years of your life.
Yeah,
And if
yeah.
I'm going, and I want to say it honestly, not just, I don't want to give
No,
you
no,
the
respect,
quick
man.
answer
Laughing.
that you would
I
type
thought,
up.
I thought he was going to be like, duck it.
No, I want to give a good answer because I know people are listening. People want to get something out of it, and ultimately, like we were talking about the other day, it's I want to leave an impact through at least some of these topics. So leadership is something that is, I think, very difficult to come to terms with. I think one of the biggest themes around entrepreneurs and entrepreneurship is this feeling of the imposter syndrome. It's like feeling you are not worthy, even though you're building this amazing thing, but you're just you have this concern that if this small thing breaks, people will discover you. And by people, I mean your customers, your friends, your colleagues, your employees. And I think that's a very significant part of ultimately how I looked at the challenge of being a leader of a big organization. We're 170 people. We have many different departments. We have 2 different laundry factories. We have drivers. We have a customer service team. We have a tech team, and so on and so on. And every single one of those teams has a different culture. They have a different working style, and they need to have a different working style. And ultimately, for me, what I've realized is, as a leader, I need to understand how to lead every single person based on who they are, not based on who I am. And I think I look at my job as making everyone else's job easier. And it's a common theme that I used to have with drivers when we first started the business, when the business was not fully vertically integrated, when we just did our own logistics. The most recurring theme is, my job is to make your job easier. And if you look at it that way, and I'm talking to the driver now, and if you look at it that way, then that means if you have any issue, then I'm here to solve it for you. And if you have any questions, then I'm here to answer it for you. And it's kind of this making people feel safe to come up to me with any problems they may have and help me help them. And the reason I like to do that is, I think, and again, this is my belief, that if people understand why their leader or why their manager does something, and they have repeated exposure to that topic from different angles, then what ends up happening is that they can start to think how you think. And the biggest challenge with a lot of companies and that I had in my old company was, I wasn't clear on what my manager wanted. I wasn't clear on how he thought about a problem. I was not clear about the considerations, or the variables he would put into his calculation in order to arrive to a conclusion. And I think that my job now, having noticed that in the other jobs, in the other companies, is to actually minimize the amount of variables. And so that when someone comes to me with a question, with a concern, with a problem, they've already answered every single question that I would have asked that they can answer. And then they leave me with a very small part, and that makes my job much faster, but also through exposure, it makes them much better at what they do. So that's kind of one topic, right? So it's always being available, always explaining the why. It seems trivial, but it makes a huge difference.
No, I totally get it. It kind of goes back to what you were saying just before that. What did you say? You said something about smooth.
Yeah. Slow is smooth and smooth is fast.
Yeah, and if you go with that smooth is fast part, if everyone shares the same mindset, understands the world kind of the same way, takes the same kind of ownership, and that the knowledge sharing is done throughout the organization, then everything is kind of smooth because there's less friction, right? Exactly. It's like a bunch of like a rowing team that's in sync. If one of you are not in sync, then the whole thing is kind of all fucked up. So that's kind of like what it sounds like in terms of what you're saying, and I completely agree. I think if everybody's singing to the same tune and everybody kind of understands and has the same vision and believes the same thing and has the same kind of ownership, then everything is smooth. And on the rare occasion where things kind of break or something needs, to get escalated or whatever, then fine, that happens. That's natural. But generally speaking, what you're describing is a cohesive, culturally aligned team.
Talking so much. Like yesterday, I've tried this out for the first time. I sat down and I gave kind of a check-in with my team. And I sat down and I blocked myself for 2 hours and for each person. And I just kept on writing. And I ended up with a document that was on one occasion 5 pages long, and the other one was 6 pages long. And it was like me talking as if I'm talking to the person sitting, as if they were sitting across the table from me. And obviously that was probably because of COVID, because I couldn't see them. But I broke down my experiences with them, my thought process about the problem that they faced, why they acted on a certain way. And again, it's to kind of engender that resonance, that kind of to put them in tune with how I think about a certain situation, so that in the future, should it come up, for them to realize that, okay, Jad thinks about this in a certain way, and I would like to address it in that way. And I will answer all the questions I know he will ask me. And then that way, that makes my job as a leader easier, because leadership is draining. Management is draining, because when you're dealing with, like, there's only so many decisions you make, any good decisions you can make on a single day. You can't make 100 good decisions on a certain day. And you want to minimize the amount of thought and effort put into every decision. And the only way that I know to do that, and again, maybe there are better ways, and I would love to hear about it if you guys know them, but the only way I know how to do that is to make sure that the information arrives to me very organized and in a way that is relevant for me, so that the givens that I need to take into consideration to answer a question is they're already there. And then my answer is quick and to the point. And if not, then my questions can be very pointed, as opposed to very, very general and very basic. So that's kind of one topic, right? Which brings me to the, I guess, less tactical answer, which is on a strategic level, how do you manage a team? Historically, what my experience has been through my old job and also through Washmen is, you just kind of let people figure it out. Yeah. As in, they have a problem, or there's a problem that the organization has. It's like, okay, well, go figure it out and come back to me. Or whenever you need help, come back, and then that's where the first part comes in. And when you need help, I'm here for you, right? That's been a critical component of us managing to scale the business with very few resources, right? We were very underfunded until lately. So the success story isn't the funding. The success story is how much we managed to do with very little funding, right? That's the success story. But people look at that, fundraise announcement, and they're like, oh, wow, they raised a lot of money. It's like, yeah, but that's not really this is nothing. This is validation of the effort, and a validation of the vision going forward. But having raised only up $1.5 million, and having achieved what we achieved, which is sales figures almost 3 times larger than our competitor that raised $7 million, with that same amount of, with money, like fraction of that money, like 25% of the fundraise, we're doing 3 times the revenue. That's the achievement. And that comes down to management style, to being very hands-on. So, right. So one other thing is, I'm very hands-on. Like, I know everyone's job in the company very well.
So man, thanks a lot. I can't help but move to this part now.
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay, so you're chief operating officer of a successful startup. You lead an organization, mid-sized organization, almost 200 people. That's amazing. But leadership is a topic that I really kind of have mixed feelings about in general. I think startups are great places, and everybody in a startup, from the founder to the entire team, is consistently pushed to the edge, especially when they're scaling and they're learning and they're going. But how do you make sure that you're a good leader, and how do you know you're a good leader, right? In the sense that, companies will outgrow, their founders and their leaders, and sometimes the founders and the leaders don't see it, right? They don't even see themselves in the mirror. They're just so stuck into the trenches of their business, and they're just plowing away. But they might, not be the right leader for the organization anymore. So they were good for, point A to point B, but now in this new phase, point B to point C, they might not be a good fit. How do you know if you're still a good fit, and how do you know if you're not a good fit, and how do you upskill yourself, right? Because as a founder, as a co-founder of a business, like, I have mixed feelings too. Sometimes, it makes sense to walk away, but sometimes you take away the passion and the mission behind the business, and that's even more dangerous, right? So how do you kind of navigate that? I mean, granted, I've had my own gaps in leadership. I've had to, work on the side to kind of improve my own ability to lead over my career and stuff. But how do you kind of deal with that nowadays?
So I think the topic of, being a founder, being in a startup that is growing really fast, you have to make some kind of compromises along the way. And generally those compromises are, they revolve around the same theme as self-care. You sleep less, you eat less, or maybe you eat poorly. You become very addicted to your phone, very stuck to your phone because you're afraid of missing out on details. For me, the moment that I realized things were breaking and I was questioning myself a lot about my ability to lead was when I started having shadow vibrations. Like I would think my phone is ringing and it wasn't ringing. And I would be like, and then I got an Apple Watch to like help me out.
Wow, shit.
Apple Watch would be vibrating. And then eventually I started having shadow vibrations on my wrist. And I knew that something was wrong, right? And then I would be sitting down, and when it got worse was when I started having palpitations. I would be sitting down in my home at midnight, disconnected from the world on a Friday or a Saturday, and then I would have, I would feel that my phone rang, and then my heart would start palpitating because I was worried that I was going to have either bad news or good news or whatever it is, right? The inconsistency of the information and never knowing what to expect and who was calling. And what they were calling for. And back then I was by myself, no operations manager, nothing. I realized that, first of all, no one was calling, and I imagined that the phone was ringing. Second, not only did I imagine that the phone was ringing, but on the back of that thing, I had palpitations in my heart. And at that moment, I remember I was walking down in Lebanon a few months later, right? These realizations, they never hit you at once. They kind of pile up, and then you'll be doing something random, and then it clicks in your head. And then we had just incorporated the company in Lebanon. It was July 2018. We had just incorporated the company in Lebanon. And I'm walking down to watch the England versus Tunisia game. And I get in, and my family's there, my cousins are there.
Being an English guy in the call,
So I remember going in there. I didn't really care about the game. I was there to see my family. And then so I go up. It's kind of, it looks like they have bleachers there. And my family's sitting downstairs, and I go up to the bleachers. I'm by myself, and I go to this website, and I've been listening to a guy called Jerry Colonna. So he's the founder of a company called Reboot. And ultimately what they do is, the executive coaching, mental health, call it what you want. Yeah. And I remember just sitting down, and it clicks in my head. I'm like, I cannot keep working like this because this cannot be healthy. This cannot be normal. And I know that the reason I'm having all these issues is because I've built and I've developed over the last 2-3 years of running this business fears that are so deeply rooted that I need to just kind of start removing them. And the main difference is, I used to work in oil and gas. My job required that I spend 50 hours without sleep, 30 hours without sleep, and you're working outdoors in negative 20 degrees Celsius, and then you're going back into like 30 degrees inside, and then you're spending, you're working outdoors for another 50, and then you're driving after being awake 30 hours, you're driving 7 hours. I mean, it was a brutal job. But the beauty of it is, after 2 weeks of work, you had a week off. And if you worked 6 weeks, then you could take 3 weeks off to reflect, and you were able to do the maintenance, the gardening work. But with being an entrepreneur, you don't have that time. You have to make that time. You create it, right? And I didn't allow myself to create it. I couldn't go on vacation. Again, we go back to, we were very resource strapped. So we had to kind of do everything ourselves. And in that moment, I sat down, and for an hour and a half, I decided, even though I had my laptop in my backpack, so I could have typed faster, I typed everything on my phone. And I summarized all the challenges that I was facing, and I sent that email out, not knowing if I would hear back, right? It's kind of a web form. 2 days later, they got back to me. One of the founders of Reboot gets back to me, they put me in contact with someone, and I find myself with an executive coach. And that kind of work has been, to me, and we've discussed this before, it's been foundational to my ability to keep checking in with myself about where I am today. Not just as a leader, but as an individual, right? As a person, how do I live my life today within the frame of work, but outside of the frame of work? How do I define what is a good day? What is a bad day? What is successful? What is success? What is not success? And so to answer your question about how do you know you're doing a good job, I think it's weird to say that, but the first way is you make sure you don't listen to anyone else, and you ask yourself the question. And if you have doubts, that means there's something to look into, right? It's really that simple, because a lot of people are like, you're doing a great job, you're doing really well, everyone likes what you're doing, and it's like, but something inside feels like it's off, and that you have to lean into that emotion, and then you have to think about it. Again, we go back to historically. I think as the company's grown, and I remember very clearly in the beginning telling Rami, my co-founder, if this company reaches 100 people, I will not be here. you know, and we go back to the imposter syndrome conversation. It's like, you know, when it gets to 100 people, people are going to find out that I'm a fraud or that I'm not good enough for this, or maybe even I will find out. And then I said, if it gets to 200 people, I won't be here. And eventually we'll get to 200. And honestly, with the amount of like, when we scale up and volumes go up, we have extra outsourced staff that help us out, temporary workers. We've been over 200 people and we've done great, right? So it's kind of this progressive game that I played with myself.
Yeah.
So, you know, 50 and then 100 and then 150 and then 200. And along the way, I mean, I stopped doing that now. Ever since I started executive coaching, I have this deep-seated trust that I'll manage to figure it out no matter what, if I want to figure it out. So the question then becomes, do I want to keep doing this? Instead of, can I do this?
Before you jump in, Chris, and talk about executive coaching, just one point here. I think they're super relevant from a COVID point of view, and also kind of what you're talking about.
Yeah.
You know, this recent time where a lot of people, managers, leaders, employees, entrepreneurs have been, you know, working from home, there's a lot of self-reflection. So what you're talking about is a lot of self-awareness, realization, and taking stock of kind of what you value, and, you know, yourself as a person. You know, this time in itself has almost given everyone that opportunity to then think through kind of what they personally value. And you start to realize where your gaps are, where your strengths are, to enable you to then, you know, work and build on them. So I know, Chris, you're probably going to go into the, you know, more on the life coaching piece, but, you know, almost everyone has been going through this cycle, you know, in terms of trying to think through, you know, where they can change, where they're weak. And from a leadership standpoint, that's super important, because the rat race, you know, trying to find time to actually, you know, assess and look at this.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I think myself coming out of COVID, I have a completely different view of you know, the leader, the person, the professional I want to be, and I think that's a whole other podcast. But man, Jad, I mean, listening to you speak. So I share the exact same view as you do. I wake up with imposter syndrome every day on everything that I do, and I think that's a natural thing, because we're the kind of people, I think Steve as well, we're the kind of people that are always going to try to push ourselves to go further and to keep growing. And in growth is unknown, because if you're trying to grow in something that you already know how to do, then you're not growing, right? So I think whenever you're navigating into something that you don't know how to do, but you're finding it out as you go, you inherently, for some of us, we will get that imposter syndrome. Now, you were describing kind of, you know, your physical health and how demanding being an entrepreneur or being a startup is and all that. And, you know, I have a similar story. I was actually, the reason I actually ended up quitting Kareem, actually, back then, if Steve remembers, I had
very well.
Yeah, I was sitting at my desk, and we were having a meeting internally. I think it was a meeting or something. All of a sudden,
it was our morning catch up. Yeah.
It was a morning catch up, and man, all of a sudden I pretty much like fell to my feet. I couldn't breathe. My heart was out of control. I don't know if it was an anxiety attack or something, but it completely took over my body. And that's when I knew, shit, I mean, I'm not in a good place. I can't lead people anymore. I'm struggling with many things, whether it's, you know, my work-life balance, my physical health, my mental health. And I realized that I couldn't sustain this moving forward. And at that point, I made a decision to leave Kareem, and that was not for lack of care for the organization, which it's never got anything to do with that. It's more that you realize that if you don't fix this, you're not going to be a good leader moving forward. And that's where kind of, you know, I completely agree with you. On the back of that, for me, I pursued a relationship that I had started before at Kareem. I had a leadership coach as well when I was at Kareem. And I just extended that relationship, and I kept it going post Kareem up to not so long ago. And it's been life-changing for me. I mean, granted, the guy that was helping me probably served more as a mental kind of psychotherapist more than a leadership coach. But I think that was you know, a big part of it. And I completely agree with you. I think the region generally really kind of measures or misunderstands the role of a leader, number one. I think I even heard you say once, lots of people want to be kings, not many people want to be leaders. And then number two, the whole concept of helping your team. I mean, I've always been under the impression that I work for my team. I have a bunch of people in the organization, and my job is to help them understand, their objectives, the vision of the company, give them the resources, the tools, the confidence, the ownership, the knowledge to do what they need to do. And if the more they need to come back to me, the worse I'm doing my job. So I completely agree with that mindset. Yeah. But first and foremost, I think the culture of the organization is what you need to get right. And as the leader of the company, if you're not in a psychological kind of good space, mental space, then there's no way that you can be a successful leader, right? So I completely agree with that, and thanks for the courage of sharing, the fact that you work with external talent. I think that's
no worries, man. Again, I got a message a few days ago. I had referred someone to my executive coach, and I got a message from them in the middle of randomly on a random Wednesday afternoon, out of the blue. Thank you so much. With a simple message and a simple intro, you changed my life, right? So this struggle of being an entrepreneur, being a leader in an organization is something that we all go through. I think I've even spoken to it with one of the guys from Beko Capital. I just don't want to say names, just whatever. I mean, it's up to them to identify themselves. But I've spoken to him about it, and he seems to think it's a very critical thing that all founders should do. And apparently they've pushed their founders to do it. And in the US, executive coaching has become a thing that VCs want their entrepreneurs to do. Because, like you said earlier, your executive coach became kind of a psychotherapist. But the reality is, man, we are bringing our issues and problems every single day to work. And, but we're the founders, we're the leaders of the organization. We're managing massive teams. Yeah. And then if you look at the company culture as a reflection of founder psychology, then even the good trait, the good traits get passed down and the bad traits get passed down, because people learn to mimic your behavior, because that ultimately enables them to pass through your blind spots, right? Again, this is any organism builds itself in that way. And if you're not looking at your own blind spots, then you're never going to catch your weaknesses. So, when it comes to my work with my executive coach, it's really as simple as you kind of go in with the situation, and the question they always ask you is, what would you like? Like, what would you like? What's the outcome? And the answer is always, you always have the answer. You know what the answer is, but you're always avoiding it. But because I like this statement here, and if you look at it, even in any organization, it tends to be true, which is your weaknesses are the shadow of your strengths, right? If you're a very thoughtful person, very considerate, sometimes you're too soft. And then when a decision needs to be made that is very black and white, you tend to over-emote and over-empathize, even though the outcome should be very clear. This person broke a rule, and this is a black and white thing. And if you don't do it, then the discipline in the organization will be completely gone. If you over-emote, that thing, that thing can come back and haunt you, because people will lose respect, right? So it's a very delicate balance. And you need to figure out your psychology, because like we said, it goes all the way. It's the culture. The culture of the company is a reflection of the psychology, the combined psychology of the entire organization. How do you deal with stress? How do you deal with tension? How do you deal with failure? Are you a person that reflects? Are you a learner? And so on and so on. And you need to be the role model.
What kind of scares me, and I've spoken to a lot of people about it. I'm pretty vocal about it with my friends and kind of like my network. Everyone knows that organizational culture thrives when companies are doing great. You know what I mean? Like, yeah. I've been in tons of businesses, and luckily I've been in a lot of really successful companies, and I've rode those success waves. And man, when you're growing, when you're like 30% month to month, your targets are getting blown out of the water. Everything's great. The culture is amazing. It's easy to get it right, but
because it's easy to ignore the problems. It's so easy to ignore the problems. Yeah.
Because they seem so much smaller than the success, right?
Exactly.
And what I'm super worried about coming out of COVID, COVID is gonna really test a lot of organizational cultures, a lot of leaders, especially in the Middle East, I think.
Why do you say the Middle East?
Because I kind of feel like leadership is really subpar in the region, man. And, I've seen, for a variety of reasons. I think, like you said, and we had a podcast with a lady called, Dr. Sarah Rasmi, and we were talking about mental health. And the region's kind of understanding of mental health, acknowledgement of mental health, and courage to confront it is lagging versus other more developed markets, around the world. And I don't know if it's cultural, if it's, just people in the Middle East just don't, respect or understand mental health and its importance, especially in the workplace. But I'm really worried that gap in understanding that, hey, it's okay, to recognize that, being stressed out and being angry and having anxiety and being frustrated. It's okay to do, to have those feelings, and there are ways to manage them. It's okay to take care, if you look at a lot of leaders in the Middle East, all of them work out. All the guys that I know, most of them work out. Yeah, I'm going to take care of myself. I'm going to go cycling. I'm going to run on the treadmill. I'm going to swim. I'm going to do weights. I'm going to do all this shit. I'm going to work out my muscles. But the one muscle I'm using day in, day out, 15 hours a day, I'm not taking care of, right? Yeah. And that's, and like you, I went to school, I worked, I had a career, before coming to the Middle East, and I was in Canada and the US. And I kind of feel that we're really lagging, even though I was there 6-7 years ago. I'm just scared of COVID, because a lot of the leaders that we have here, though, are great in motivation, are great in passion. I'm fearful that a lot of them going through this tough tunnel of despair, these 3-4 months, however long it's going to stretch for, coming out of that, the culture of these organizations are going to be tested, the patience, the capabilities, the motivation. So I'm worried that the leadership that we have in the region might not be well equipped, and I just hope that we have the maturity as a society, as a community, to kind of see the world what it is, and see our weaknesses and fix them on a personal basis, right? So
I think it's good. I think it's good. I think people should be broken, right? If you're not broken at some point, what are you going to build on? Do you want to build on a shoddy, weak foundation? Do you want to build on, like you said, do you want to be, our job as ultimately my job as a manager, my job as a leader, my job as anything in relationship to anyone is to enable the success of my team. If everyone around me is successful, then I, by association, will also be successful, right?
Yeah.
And if there's something in my mind that's limiting my ability to choose the right colleagues to bring onto the team, that's limiting my ability to retain talent, to foster relationships that lead to long-term loyalty, that lead to openness, because sometimes when you're in the same company, things change, your considerations change. When you're in Karim, your priorities changed, and it all hit you at once. Why? Can I cuss?
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, why the fuck am I here? Why the fuck am I here?
Yeah, totally.
And that's the thing. It's like, why on earth am I doing what I'm doing? Why did I come to work today? I hate this place. I hate everyone around me. It's one of those. Like when I quit, I remember. So this is the funny story. I'm writing a story now, which will be published eventually. It's called The Week, the week that broke me, the year that made me. But ultimately, it comes down to this one moment where I sat down and I had to Google how to write a resignation letter, as if you even need to Google that, right? It's easy. But I was in my brain, I was so damaged after, the circumstances were so difficult, and I just couldn't bear it anymore. No sleep, super cold outside, pressure being piled on by my manager, by the client, by my colleagues. And I'm this like rod, this copper rod in the middle of all this electricity being shot at me. And I just froze. And in that moment, and this is, people say they don't have regrets. I will always say this. I regret this moment. I regret not quitting within 2 weeks of that realization. I regret writing a resignation letter and putting on a piece of paper, putting it on my desk and not signing it, just to show my manager, whoever was in the company, that I was, I'm so sad. I'm so upset. Here's my resignation letter on my desk, but I don't have the courage to sign it, right? And I get fired up about this because I should have quit. And because I didn't, I was a coward in that moment. And that's what ultimately really broke me. It wasn't really the fact that I had, this blow up and this, you can hear the rage and this frustration. It was the fact that I didn't have the balls the courage to sign that piece of paper and say, I'm out because this is not healthy. This is not right. And there's a limit to how much you're allowed to push yourself. There's a limit. After 32 hours of traveling and 3 hours of sleep and 42 hours without any sleep and only 7 hours, you should not be awake for another 42 hours and driving 7 hours on the road. You should not be doing that. And yet I pushed myself. And then I went to another even worse experience and I continued doing that for 2 years. And this cycle of feeling like pain is gain, that you can, no pain, no gain, this cycle is broken. The logic is broken because there's a lot of things you can do when you reflect, right? And then so the whole concept of, how the rest of it really helped me get to where I am today, that's where the work happens. That's where the growth happens. Obviously, you need to be broken. And if this coronavirus is going to be the thing, the circumstances that this event brings about to people's life, if this is the thing that breaks them, then good. Then they have to do the work. Good that you're miserable. That's good. Sadness opens your heart. Open up your heart. Consider your conversations, talk to your friends, your relationships, talk to everyone around you, call that person you shouldn't have pissed off 6-7 months ago. You were wrong with them and it's eating you up inside. Deal with that shit because that eats you up inside, man. All these all these little friction points you've created along your life that limit you from moving freely, you should address those. It's like, and you have that within your team too, right? And you need to address that within your team. And the only way to really do it, like you said, Steve, is like coronavirus has forced us all to think. And even though I'm talking right now as if I have this figured out, I don't have it figured out 100%. But what I do know is since this thing has started, I'm waking up every morning very early, 5:30, 6 a.m. I mean, for fathers like you, Chris, I know that's super late, but for me, that's like really, really early. And I'm sitting down and I'm like reflecting on my decisions. I'm reflecting on my thoughts. I'm considering all these weeds that are there. I need to remove them from the garden and all that little stuff. And at the same time, I'm kind of thinking through it. And then now I realized that, I used to meditate before I came to Dubai. And oddly enough, Chris, funny enough, you said it, 6 years ago, I came here 5 years ago. That was very normal for me, but then I lost it because no one here does it. No one here talks about it. It's this thing like, peer pressure. I wouldn't say peer pressure because I don't surround myself with anyone who's going to like put me down, but just inertia, man. Inertia, you lose it. No one says, oh yes, man, I meditated this morning and I realized that when you close your eyes and you breathe and you focus on your breath, that all of a sudden you feel like everything opens up around you. Like no one says that, right? In Canada, that's a conversation you'll have like in a salad bar, you go to a salad bar and the person in front of you is like, wow, I had this crazy moment today in my life. Whereas here it's very transactional. And I think by virtue of us being entrepreneurs, being in the startup ecosystem, the talk around emotion is not a pleasant one. It's like, I think, I'm not going to be the best operations person ever. That's not my skill set. I can be very good. The complexity of it stresses me out. I'm not going to be the best financials person or how to run finances person ever. But when it comes, what I can imagine is, what I can understand very well, is how emotions impact decisions and impact relationships around you. And the management of that is something that I think everyone can develop, right? You just have to be interested in it. And so if coronavirus, the circumstances around this thing end up, wreaking havoc around on a person's psychology and mentality, then you have people figure it out, right? And if that's what happens and the outcome turns out to be positive, then great. And if it turns out to be negative for that person, they'll figure it out one day. Because like you, like me, like everyone else, like you, like me, everyone else around us are actually considering what do they value. They're reevaluating their relationships. They're reevaluating their thoughts. They're reevaluating their decisions. Why am I still here? Why do I still do what I do? Like, why am I in this job? Again, no one has left Washmen, so that's good. But other people, like I talked to someone yesterday, he's like, I have no, I was here for the money and now the money is like, it's not the same. It'll never be the same. He's like, I'm done. I want to move industries. So, okay, good. Like that's good. That's a loss for private. That's a loss for private equity and a gain for someone else because this guy's going to choose a job that he really cares about.
Yeah, I mean, totally. I was having a conversation this morning. I think it's super funny, super relevant. I'm exploring a kind of an avenue with DUCKLIFE into a new industry, maybe a new industry that we're going to have a client in. It's super, super interesting. We're having the same conversation about COVID and the 360 impact of COVID. And, you know, there's a personal cleansing, like you said, like dealing with your shit, understanding, you know, what makes you happy, what's unhealthy for you, what's healthy for you, etc. Where your mind's at, and really like ponder about, you know, the bigger question of life. But also organizations are getting cleansed, right? So you know badly run businesses that have, you know, cash flows out of whack, that don't have sustainable, you know, business models or what have you, you know, or not diversified enough, etc., are completely getting kind of a shock for their kind of business at the core of what they do. And I agree with you. I guess you have to know something's broken before you can fix it. And I think COVID is basically, you know, pointing out the obvious in a lot of things that people kind of brushed under the rug, personally or professionally. So
it amplifies everything.
It
totally just amplifies everything, and it forces you to deal with it.
And it also it's also exposing, you know, on the other side as well, right? Because when you think about that exposure, you know, there's nowhere really for it to hide. So people are seeing more. People are walking into this with their eyes open, or they're certainly going to come out with it with their eyes open.
Yeah, 100%.
And Chris, you said it earlier, right? You said it earlier when you said when things are going well, no one is looking. Everyone ignores the small details, right? All the small issues, but then eventually they pile up. They go into a backlog, and all of a sudden now, when things stop, those that are not very thoughtful, those that don't really have a place in time in which they reflect. And I'm not saying those as in people, I mean those organizations, they end up having a big closet of like ghosts that they have to figure out, right? And right now, like you said, it exposes those ghosts are there, and they become, you know, the funny thing is, like, we were talking the other day with the team, and I said the two elephants in the room. It's like now there's two massive elephants in the room. And like it's before there was like this one thing, now there's everything else that we've ignored, and you can't ignore it anymore. You have to discuss it. Like for me, it's kind of like going into my mental space and ignoring the fact that I had to make tough decisions sometimes. Like I had to deal with that. It was a moment of reckoning. I had to figure it out, and I had to make those decisions. Deal with the consequence and own up the consequences. Yeah.
And interestingly, I think in the startup world, in the ecosystem, I think what's also super explicit now more than ever is this whole talk about profitability, right? So, you know, we're entering an era where all the VCs are like no longer interested in the you know, grow or die kind of approach, right? We started to see that the high burn subsidy cash burning businesses are no longer the way of the world. And, you know, with the economies the way they are, and on the edge of a cliff, with deflation around the corner, with, you know, with unemployment, with the world's kind of doomsday, you know, world that we're living in today.
Well, the money printers are still going, so
the money printers are still going, but the VCs. Yeah. But the VCs are retracting a lot, right? They're like, okay, no, guys, okay, ride hailer, okay, food aggregator, okay, shared workspace, okay, you guys were cool, you were scaling, but you know this pandemic has stopped everything, stopped burning money, right? And those guys are exposed like crazy too, and we're starting to see that. I mean, today, right before we started our podcast, by the way, you know, Uber Eats announced that they're consolidating within Carib. Right, so you're going to see a lot of these.
It's shocking.
Yeah. No sarcasm. But it's. I agree with you. I actually think, on the flip side, I think the startup world and our community here is going to be kind of left exposed, and only the tough, you know, the natural selection will happen.
Yeah, and that sucks, man, and that sucks. Yeah. One thing that I want to touch on is this whole Uber of anything.
Yeah.
You know, so when we first started, my co-founder is from Uber, right? Mm-hmm. He left Uber to start Washmen, and so the main theme was, you know, the Uber of laundry, the Uber of something. Now there was the Uber of home cooking, for God's sake, you know.
Some good
Like,
branding,
what does
by the
that
way.
even mean?
I mean, it's good branding.
Yeah, the Uber of anything. And then we even fundraise on the back of it, man. And the sad thing is, guys, and I have to admit it, I thought we were the Uber for laundry. And then it only took me 3 weeks, like not 3 weeks, but like 3 months. So we launched around the beginning of October 2015. By the end of December, I was like, we are nothing to do with Uber, because we're not going from point A to point B to point C. We're going from point A, and we're stopping in 15 doors, and then these clothes come back to the factory, and then each customer has like 17 different pieces, and each one goes into the washing machine, one has to be air dried, one of them has to be machine dried, one of them has to be dry cleaned, one of them has a stain, one of them doesn't, you know, and so on and so on. And this one needs cold water and hot water, and so on and so on. And then you have to finish that, wash it, clean it, iron it, and then take thousands of items, put them back into like, recombine them into different orders, and then the driver has to come and he has to deliver them to the right doorstep. And then I'm looking at this, and like, you know, at some points we were cleaning up to 500,000 garments, half a million garments a month, even more, by the way. I mean, 500,000 was not too long ago. Was a while back. Yeah, we were cleaning 500,000 garments a month. So when we were cleaning 500,000 garments a month, the amount of complexity, the room for error that exists, 0.01% is not good enough. You know, and we are, the problem, and the reason I wanted to get to this point, but 0.001% is also not good enough. And the reason I say that is when your business is so sophisticated and so complex, having to optimize revenue and margins along each chain of the transaction becomes very critical. So when you're in the food delivery business, that chain isn't, I don't know that chain very well. It's not very clear, but for a business like ours, you know, every single touch point, we need to improve our performance financially. And that performance has an impact on the customer service, on the customer experience, and the amount of customer service we have thereafter. And then, so, you know, businesses like ours they don't grow really like that, you know, they grow slowly. And what I mean by that, for those that are just listening, they don't grow exponentially because there's a very limited number of people that want laundry, and there's a limited number of clothing, and people don't use it frequently enough, right? So in our business, it's kind of a commodity that's being technologized. And so we never got the funding. So we had to focus on our unit economics. We actually reached profitability twice before. So before the last fundraise, we touched profitability. And I remember at one point sitting down in Loka in Dubai Marine, celebrating this moment. I mean, it was a moment of awe. So it was myself, Rami, the co-founder, his wife, and Ramzi Ismail, who was the guy who got us into Flat Six Labs. I mean, it was Rami's hustle, but it was also Ramzi's like love of Rami's hustle. He's like, I love this guy because he hustles so much. He's bothering me nonstop. This guy's bothering me every minute. So he brought us in. So he was so relevant in that moment. And I remember sitting down, and in that moment, I'm like, okay, this is doable. We can be profitable. And we have that in the back of our minds. But, you know, when you're receiving money, and I like to say, I don't want to say where it came from, but, you know, if you get money to financially fund stupidity, then you're just going to amplify that stupidity. You're going to amplify the incoherence of something. And I'm not talking about a specific business. I'm talking about any business. Right.
I'm only smiling just out of it.
You get it. Like you just get to amplify it. I mean, the American VCs have funded some crazy stuff. Yeah, they funded some crazy stuff. And then ultimately, the challenges here with the region is, I remember a while when we were fundraising is this company in the US? Okay, the company in the US failed. So this is not for us. It's like, yeah, but this is a different market. Entrepreneurs here, I think the challenges that we all have is a lot of us are not from the region, or we lived here. We haven't lived here long enough to understand the real problems. Like now that you've lived in the UAE for 5-6 years, you understand the challenges. If I'm coming here to solve a problem that the social fabric desires, I wouldn't have been able to solve it 5 years ago. I did laundry, and it was an insight that Rami had because he lived here for a while, right? I think until the VCs kind of, and I think they have started already. until the VC stopped telling everyone, and I don't know if those guys are still around, by the way, maybe they're not, but until they stop telling you, hey, is this company in the US and how are they doing in the US? Until they stop doing that, I think, and they just copy that model. So whatever was crazy there, they're just bringing the crazy here, right? And I think that, people don't stop to think about all these businesses. I mean, you and I were talking about Uber the other day. I mean, they're massive and they still haven't made money. Like WeWork, how on earth did anyone convince anybody that WeWork was a tech business? Like, how does that even happen? What is the thought process that goes behind it?
I raised my hand for this one. I don't want to. I don't want to comment. I'm gonna duck it, guys. On this one.
Good. How did anyone convince anyone that WeWork was worth something? And then the challenge becomes, who's stopping to think about this? Herd mentality exists in everything. Even among very successful investors, the fear of missing out is something that exists. So these guys go in and they deploy capital towards something that is a capital destruction machine instead of allocating toward businesses. And it's all out of the desire to make massive returns, right? It's the fear of missing out on returns. Everyone wants to be part of the WeWork story, and everyone from the region wants to be part of the fund that exited, that had a great exit. We exited a US company. Okay, fun. Go ahead.
I mean, we can get into the whole discussion of how the VC model is completely fucked, but
it's actually a topic. It's actually a topic for our next podcast that will be coming.
Yeah. I mean, on the next one, Jad, I'd love to get your feedback on discuss, but I completely agree with you. I think a lot of things along the way are broken, and a lot of these business models and unsustainable models are getting exposed more than ever with COVID, and we're starting to see kind of the consolidation or cleansing happening right now. Like think about it. Like, would you have said literally 2 months ago that all these things would be happening, that WeWork is, on the brink of potentially disappearing, that Uber is consolidating with, in favor of Karim and the region, that, profitability is on the top of, everyone's mind, on the end of everyone's tongue. Like
I would have never guessed it, but it was because, man, it got to some point, even right now, for example, you look at the stock market and it's higher than it was in March. And you're like, man, this makes no sense. So when it crashes, it's going to be, if it crashes, I don't want to wish anything bad happens.
In about an hour.
If that happens, then, yeah. So if anything bad happens, then you kind of look back and be like, okay, again, we go back to the challenge of a lot of things that happen in startup. Like, I think the job of a leader, the job of an entrepreneur is to kind of realize that the narrative that's being peddled around you is not always correct. Sometimes it is, but it's not always correct. And you have to be able to break down the problem into its basics. Like, what are the first principles that you'll assess this business by? If for every dollar you make, you have to pay someone 50 cents to give you that dollar. So you're paying $1.50 to get $1 back. There's something wrong with that business. And if the economies of scale, once you've reached billions of dollars of revenue, you still don't make, still haven't kicked in and you're not making any profit, then that business model needs to be revisited. So that these changes are happening, for me, again, I'm happy that they're happening, because at least they signal a return to normalcy, a return to fundamentals, that businesses need to make money.
Yeah.
Like everyone is trying to be Amazon.
A businessman, not an entrepreneur.
Yeah. Well, entrepreneurship is not a cool thing now. It's like, damn, it's a responsibility. Like, I actually need to make more money than I'm losing.
Yeah, I need to build a business.
Yeah, I need to make more money than I'm spending every month.
But you're right. But the whole system has to change, though, for that. The incentive behind the system. I mean, and that's what this potentially will start to bring in this new change and a different way of operating. Because while you're incentivized, while the fast growth companies, the ones that burn cash, will gain more cash, get more injection, then that will continue.
But it's crazy, right? Startups are only going to be able to raise money and still continue only to be able to raise money if they can promise growth rates that are sexy enough. And when the VCs see an operations heavy organization, when they see that the growth rate isn't like 30% month to month, and it's like 5% month to month, which is still fucking mind blowing, by the way.
Yeah, it compounds to 2x at the end of the year, 6% per month.
Exactly.
It's actually 2x at the end of the year. Yeah.
It's incredible, right? But as long as the VCs are asking for that, which By the way, I think we need to have a VC on the podcast so we can drill those guys.
But I think, man, can we give them one benefit though? The VCs in the region, the fact that they're cautious makes sense. It kind of makes sense. I'm not justifying everything, but being cautious is good. Chris is ducking it, right? He's out of the screen. But it's good. It's good to be cautious to some extent. Yeah. I mean, again, maybe you have your. I'd like to know your thought process about.
No, listen, I know, I love those guys. By the way, all the guys that you know, all the VCs that you're friends with, I'm friends with, right? And I think I have a huge respect for a lot of those guys, especially the ones that I think you know really well and I know really well. I don't want to name call them. I just don't want to.
Yeah, no worries.
But those guys I respect heavily, right? I think there are two groups for sure. And I don't want to generalize, but generally, what my only kind of negative thing that I can say about the region VC landscape is that it's an extremely immature kind of industry, and in terms of their learning curve and their experience, is still a long way to go, number one. And then number two, I also think that unfortunately the landscape, the 100 VCs that we have today, which have mushroomed in the last 2 years, right? Like we had like 10 5 years ago, now we have 100. These VCs, unfortunately, are still just the tentacles of the mega funds, right?
Yeah.
They're not really independent thinkers with different experiences. They're still they're all raising funds from those.
They're not thesis driven. They're not thesis driven, and they're not finding investors within the industry that is relevant to what they want to invest in, right? Yeah.
Precisely. They're still just going to raise money from the big, 5 family funds and the one big government fund over there. So it's still the same, agenda.
To be fair, I think private equity has the same challenge. Yeah. I was talking to my friend in private equity, and he was telling me that they have similar issues, right?
Of course.
It's again, the maturity of markets takes time to achieve, and I think people like yourself, people like the VCs that are aware of the challenge. I mean,
and they do exist. Right?
Those are the guys that are going to change the narrative. They're going to be the pioneers, but along the way, they're going to be demonized because, unfortunately, when you want to change things, you can't take a leap. You have to start somewhere. You have to blend in before you make your way, before you pave your way. I'm not an expert too much on VC in the region. We actually never fundraised from the region, right? We fundraised from everywhere outside. We have from Russia, from Germany, from Lebanon, from Saudi, but we never really raised. And Saudi was mainly angels. We haven't raised from here, so I don't know. I don't really, and I don't watch the market too much. I don't know who's fundraising either, but I do know that it's going to take time for us in the region to find a kind of our identity as entrepreneurs, to understand what the ecospace looks like, what the ecosystem looks like, what the space looks like, and ultimately to kind of build our own hypotheses. Like you said, right now it's a tentacle of a mega fund. Eventually, some of these guys are going to break out. They're going to get exits. They're going to have carry, and on the back of that carry, they're going to establish their own funds. They're going to attract money from people, and they're going to start running hypotheses. And I think as Saudi opens up, as Egypt opens up, I think these markets mature effectively. As these markets mature, we'll see some changes. It's not that I'm not hopeful. I'm just kind of reading where things are going. You need maturity. And what does that even look like? I don't know. I have no idea.
Absolutely. Listen, I'm not thrashing. The VC world. I have lots of respect for those guys.
But we should get them on the podcast.
But generally, I think we need to get them on here and maybe have.
I'd be so interested in knowing and looking at how their perspective has changed too, right? Because they're a fundamental part of the system here, right? They're fundamental.
Yeah. Absolutely, they're the fertilizer, man. I'm not gonna say where fertilizer comes from, but anyway. I'm just kidding. That'll happen. I'm just kidding. Maybe I'll bleep that part out in the edit.
Yeah.
Cool. Jad, we're an hour and a half in, man.
Okay.
I really
that was long, huh?
Yeah. I really want to start by thanking you, man, big time. I really appreciate the time you've taken to kind of
thanks, Jack.
It's
a pleasure, guys. It's a pleasure.
And your journey so far. I'm super impressed. by kind of your maturity and understanding, who you are and how you've managed to build your career and build your organization and build your team, etc. So thank you very much for sharing that with us. And yeah, man, thanks for coming on DUCKit.
It's a pleasure, guys. Take care.
Thanks, man.
Cheers. Bye-bye.
Bye.